Was it one small step for man and one giant leap for mankind? Or one of the most enduring conspiracy theories of all time? We have the facts. Ever since mankind took its first steps on the moon, photos and videos from the mission have been picked apart, inspected, and dissected. But about 400,000 people worked on the Apollo program. And that's a lot of mouths to keep shut about such a sensational secret. In the 1960s, the space race was serious business, and America was desperate to beat the Soviets to the moon and plant a flag there. But did the government want it so badly that they faked the whole mission in order to ensure success? Some people think so.
Since Neil Armstrong first set foot on the moon, the conspiracy theories began.
Everybody loves a conspiracy.
That's Paul Delaney, astronomer and senior lecturer at York University.
Can you effectively generate that type of illusion today? The answer is probably yes. But back in 1969, 70, 71, the answer is no.
Conspiracy number 1. How is the flag waving in no atmosphere? NASA knew image was everything, and if it wanted to secure more government funding, the public needed to be impressed.
A flag standing on the surface of the moon, which is limp, isn't nearly as good a photo op.
They made it look like it was waving in the wind by installing a horizontal rod on top of the flag. However, the astronauts were unable to extend the entire way, giving it that waving effect.
There's, of course, no wind on the moon. There's no way to naturally make it sort of fly as you'd expect a flag to be. So instead, they created this mechanism that would keep the flag unfurled even without that wind, keep it sort of outstretched. Unfortunately, as the astronauts were installing it, the mechanism got a little bit jammed before it was completely unfurled all the way. So this means that the flag does have sort of a permanent ripple in it, a ripple that doesn't move, doesn't change, but it is always there. Additionally to this, when those astronauts were originally installing that flag, as they knocked the flag, that caused that momentum, caused that flag to look like it was moving a little bit, even though there was, again, no wind.
Conspiracy number 2. Why aren't there any stars in the photos? A limited exposure range is the reason why we can't see stars in any of the Apollo photos. Unlike our eyes, cameras can take in only a certain amount of light. If the exposure is too high, everything will look too bright. Too low, everything will look too dark.
The sun was shining on them. They were reflecting brightly. The surface was reflecting brightly. Stars on Earth, let alone the moon, it's the same brightness. They're relatively faint.
You see the same effect of this if you try and take a picture of the night sky with your own smartphone at home. You'll find that you just get a picture of complete blackness, because in reality, if you wanted to take a picture of those stars, you'd have to use an exposure time of a good few seconds, maybe even a couple of minutes to get all those stars in.
Conspiracy number 3. The shadows are wrong. Conspiracy theorists point out that since the sun is the only light source on the moon, shadow angles should be consistent. However, when sunlight hits the surface of the moon, some of it bounces off, meaning the moon itself becomes a reflective light source. Professional photographers refer to this as a fill. That's why an astronaut in the lunar module's shadow isn't completely shrouded in black. The moon's light is softening the shadow.
The surface itself is very bumpy, very lumpy, lots of craters and mountains, things like that. So the sun, when it bounces off that surface of the moon, it can sometimes bounce off in a few different directions caused by all those uneven surfaces. And this makes some of those shadows look like they're coming from perhaps different directions that you're not expecting. Additionally to this, there is actually a little bit of light that we receive on the moon from the Earth itself. Some of the sun's light will bounce off all those blue oceans, and that will cause something called Earthshine, which also illuminates the moon a little bit from another direction.
Number 4. Why didn't the astronauts die from radiation exposure? The spacecraft's hull shielded the astronauts from being exposed to lethal radiation while traveling through the Van Allen belts, layers in Earth's magnetic field that trap solar wind particles, creating high levels of radiation.
But the spacecraft that took those Apollo 11 astronauts out through that Van Allen belt was flying at a very high speed, meaning that they were only exposed to that radiation for a very short amount of time. A short enough amount of time that literally the spacecraft walls themselves were enough to protect them from that radiation.
Once cleared, they were exposed to natural background radiation.
You certainly wouldn't want the astronauts on the surface of the moon in their spacesuits for days on end, but for the hours that we're talking about on the lunar surface, The radiation environment is comparable to the radiation environment we have here.
Conspiracy number 5. Who filmed Neil Armstrong stepping on the moon?
Are we going to send people to the moon to stand on the moon and not have a camera strapped to the outside of the lunar module?
NASA put cameras on every piece of the Apollo spacecraft. That's why we have stunning images like this, and this.
You don't go that far and miss the photo opportunity of a century of history.
If you're still skeptical, several photos of the moon's surface have been taken over the decades, showing Apollo lunar module exactly where Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin parked it 50 years ago.
The notion that a conspiracy of the magnitude that's required, needing tens of thousands of people to stay quiet about it for decades, again, the US government can't keep a secret for more than a few hours, generally speaking, let alone for decades.
If a module of that size were to try and land softly on the Earth, you probably would see a very large blast crater caused by all the retro rockets, all the thrusts being fired in the opposite direction to slow the spacecraft down. However, on the moon there is much lower gravity, so much less of that backwards thrust is needed to slow the spacecraft down, so not enough to actually cause a crater at all. One of the things was that they brought back a huge amount of lunar rocks, lunar samples that have been thoroughly tested in labs to prove that they are actually from the moon. Additionally to that, the Apollo 11 astronauts left some mirrors on the surface of the moon, mirrors that we can actually fire lasers from here on Earth. It's an experiment that is being carried out to get very accurate measurements of how far away the moon and the Earth are from each other.
But NASA's broadcast videos and photos from the moon landing have been heavily inspected and debated by moon landing deniers for the last 50 years. And to date, there's been nothing to show the moon landings were faked.